Good afternoon. It's Monday, November 18th. This is Micah Mitchell with Crystal Clear Weather. My volume or my audio is probably going to sound like garbage because I forgot my microphone. I'll correct that with the next video. But I want to take a look at what we've got coming over the next few days because we've got quite the range of weather that we're going to be dealing with across the Midwest, Great Lakes, and Ohio Valley. Here's a look at the radar across the central part of the United States, and we can see this large low pressure system spinning out here, getting ready to pass kind of out of northern Oklahoma into southern parts of Kansas. And we can see there's quite a large rain shield wrapping around this low pressure system. We've got a little bit of light rain extending out across Indiana. That'll be kind of patchy there, and maybe a little bit in Ohio. But the heaviest rains are going to fall kind of along this ahead of these fronts and kind of wrapping around the northwest portion of this low pressure system, which that low pressure is deepening and is becoming more and more intense. Some severe weather is going to be possible. In fact, I believe if we zoom in here a little bit, yeah, there are a couple of warnings beginning to pop right here at the very front edge of this uh, front. So, Oklahoma, parts of Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, parts of Kansas, maybe as far north as Iowa. We may be looking at a severe threat for today before this low pressure system moves off to the northeast and begins to pull away from the dynamics that it needs to create this widespread severe. Here's a look at the Storm Prediction Center's outlook for today. And you can kind of see this little hook right here is where the low pressure system is, as it'll track off to the northeast. There's a marginal risk of severe as far north as southwestern Iowa and much of Missouri, much of Arkansas, eastern parts of Oklahoma, Texas, all of Louisiana. In fact, there's a slight risk across Louisiana as they may have a little bit better dynamics along the bottom end of that front. As we take a look at the risks that go along with that, there's a tornado risk, only about 2%, but it does exist in these northern regions. And again, where those initial warnings are popping off for severe thunderstorms is kind of right along this edge. So as we get deeper into the afternoon, there will probably be more severe weather possible across this entire hashed in region. I have no reason to disagree with what the Storm Prediction Center has. And then the damaging wind threat, almost identical to where the tornado threat is. There's no real hail threat. We don't have that kind of lift involved, but there is some spin involved in these storms. So just know that, again, from Iowa on south to the Gulf Coast, as any two types of severe may be possible today: tornadoes and damaging winds. Looking at a regional view of the European model from Pivotal Weather. You can see the low pressure system down here just on the bottom corner of the screen. That'll be lifting off to the northeast. You can kind of see the activity that it has wrapped around. No model seems to really have a very good grip on the coverage on this, but the European is doing reasonably well. It does have the extension of lighter precipitation into Indiana. A lot of the models were struggling with that. So we'll roll with the European. And as we advance through the day, you can see that low pressure out there move very hard north, kind of north northeast. So it'll be driving up toward Minnesota as we get later into the day, and then this is into the overnight hours tonight. The low pressure again push into the northeast. Minnesota gets in on the precipitation. Most of the areas to the east will have already picked up a decent amount of precipitation as this low advances. And we can kind of see this line extending. By the time we're getting into the overnight hours, a lot of the dynamics will be gone. I wouldn't be surprised by some gusty storms, maybe some special weather statements in here through Tuesday morning, but the severe risk should largely stay to the south along the southern end of the front as we get into the day tomorrow, kind of to the south of the region that I'm covering with this page. And then as we take a look, this again begins to advance through. We see the low pressure system that by this is by tomorrow morning. It's up into Minnesota. It's going to be pretty windy. You can see these black lines, these isobars are pretty tight. So you can expect some pretty windy conditions really across much of the region. but especially on this lead edge across, I'd say, eastern Minnesota and across Wisconsin will probably be the windiest portions of it. The front will be getting through Indiana and pressing to the east as we get farther into the day tomorrow. This is by 7 o'clock in the morning, and then by the afternoon, most of that activity will then press on out of the region. Here's a look at the Europeans' take on total precipitation. I think it'll be more patchy than this. The European is not. The European and GFS and Canadian models are not as high resolution, but it's still doing a pretty good job. I think we'll see a pretty widespread amounts over an inch, near or over an inch across the western parts of the region, across Minnesota, Iowa, probably hit and miss in Missouri, maybe even a couple of amounts over here in Illinois that could be that high. By the time you're getting over into Indiana and Ohio, western half of Ohio, those amounts should be a half inch or less, and really even the half inch amounts will probably be pretty isolated the way things are looking right now. So that gets us through tomorrow evening with the precipitation and with the storm activity. And that last thing we'll take a look at is what happens when we get a secondary low later this week as far as snow potential. So here we are, sticking with the European just for consistency's sake. Again, I don't really forecast by the models, and I'll start doing some of my own graphics for you as we get a little more into winter. But we'll just take a look at what it's got, because the models are actually beginning to come a little more in agreement on what may happen. So the main low pressure system by this point, this is Wednesday morning, will have lifted off into southern Canada. And then as we watch, there's a secondary low out here that'll bring some precipitation across southern Illinois, across Indiana and Ohio. But then you'll watch and this will kind of stall out and pinwheel back. And as it pinwheels back, it begins to pull in cold air from the north. And we can see it begins to pinwheel around. And as soon as it begins to make that turn, it intensifies and it begins to pull cold air in along the backside of it. You can see the cold air kind of nosing these blue lines right here, really beginning to wedge in behind this. And that's going to be the key on whether it snows. I do believe we will see snow, but how much it snows into this part of the region. And we can see it kind of spin around, and by the time it's beginning to back into Michigan, this would be Thursday morning. It's the Europeans putting down some decent snow. The Canadian agrees. The GFS is a little more spotty on it, and the NAM 3K only goes to about this point, and it also is beginning to pick up some decent snow. So I think we're on the right track with that. This will then begin to drop back to the southwest, and as it does, we get into Thursday afternoon. It's going to be real close on whether this is rain or snow, as maybe even a mix of it. A lot of it's going to depend on how close to the surface that cold air gets. And I do believe it's going to be pretty close to the surface. Temperatures will be plunging, but the surfaces will still be pretty warm, so it's going to have to snow hard in order to cover them. And this kind of intensity would cover things, would cover roads, would cover grass. Of course, as soon as the snow stops, it'll start melting off, but it would cover. So we'll keep an eye on that as we go through, and then we can see this low pressure then begins to spin around, and it'll begin to once again loop and head back off to the east, and then move on out of the region. So I'm going to backtrack to Wednesday just a little bit. I'm using snow depth for a reason I mentioned the other day, and that's the surfaces are relatively warm. So what falls, what the forecast model might think will fall from the sky, what actually does fall from the sky will not be what actually sticks to the ground, because the ground is relatively warm. But I'm going to backtrack to the overnight hours of Tuesday into early Wednesday, because I failed to mention, you look up here across northwestern Minnesota, and there could be some snow backing around the low that passes through the region tomorrow. As that low goes up into Canada, it will begin to pump some cold air around, and that will actually be part of what helps feed the cold air that will merge into this low pressure back here that's pinwheels back across Michigan and Indiana. So you can see as that in the northwest backs in early Thursday, this will actually be late in the evening on Wednesday, and we begin to see the snow develop over Michigan. Then as we advance, you can see some pretty heavy snow here as the wind whips around off of the Great Lakes are very warm, so they are going to be some really good fuel for lake effect snow. So the kind of the thumb of Michigan, this is what sticks to the ground, and it's putting down 9 inches, 8 to 9 inches across the thumb of Michigan. And then as that begins to advance around, we can see decent snow then beginning to move down into Indiana and Ohio with about an inch or so on the ground. It may be 2 or 3 inches that actually falls from the sky. So keeping in mind that it could drop 2 or 3 inches from the sky, if it snows hard enough, it could accumulate even more than this. But if it doesn't snow as hard, then it would just be about a dusting. So again, we're going to have to monitor that as it gets closer. And then we can see that then begin to spin around and go into Ohio, West Virginia, and then it all begins to move out. And then you can see by the time we reach, this is Friday afternoon, you can see the snow that fell over here is largely melted. There's, where it was heavier snow up here in the thumb is beginning to melt. But notice back here over Minnesota, northwestern Minnesota, it's not melting nearly as quickly because there'll be more cold air over there. And as we get more snows, these areas back in here are probably going to retain the snow that falls more readily than the southern parts of this region because it's going to be colder up there. The ground's going to get cold faster than it is down here across the Ohio Valley. So that's kind of what we're looking at through Friday. I'll cut it off there. The video's getting a little long, but I just kind of wanted to give you an update on what we can expect over the next couple of days. And I will update as needed. This is Micah Mitchell with Crystal Clear Weather. Have a great day.